They send a ghost? Eric's Jundal's voice barked across the summit chamber, breaking the uneasy murmurs into jagged laughter. His words hung in the air like smoke, curling above the marble floor where centuries of treaties had once been signed. The council delegates leaned forward in their thrones of woven auralite, their faces marked with a blend of curiosity and disdain. Beyond the glinting podiums, Earth's envoy appeared, a solitary figure emerging from the sun-streaked archway at the chamber's end. No escort, no retinue. Only the sharp click of Darren Vosk's boots against the crystalline tiles disturbed the heavy silence. Darren's steps were even, almost dismissive, as though the grandeur of Karan Terra's mediation hall meant less than dust to him. The hall itself seemed to pulse in quiet protest. Columns etched with ancient cosmic battles reflected fractured streams of morning light, blinding in their opulence. Above, banners embroidered with the insignias of 50 worlds drooped from the arched ceiling, each swaying gently in the conditioned breeze, a courtly nod to the power the council believed it held. The scent of alkaloid polish from the polished platforms mingled with the underlying sharpness of ionized air from the heads-up security grids lining the walls. A dry tension scratched at the throats of those seated, a pressure unnoticed by most, but Darren felt it settle around him like an old familiar coat. He comes unarmed, no battalions, no negotiations prepared, Voltron Sir sneered, lips curling above his scaled chin as he tapped an impatient claw against the laser plasma display hovering before him. Strings of Earth's projected demands, mining rights, reparations, the usual scraps of power, flickered briefly before glitching, a twitch no one seemed to notice. Darren reached the center of the dais, pausing before the council's semicircular arrangement. He did not bow, he did not speak. His pale gray eyes swept across the chamber, calm as ice shelf waters, noting every pulse of the security sensors nested in the chandeliers above. Not one flicker escaped his gaze. Across the chamber, Tharnik Vol shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the first to register the unnatural stillness threading the room. His gill plates flared in a silent reflex, tasting the air, searching for what instincts had already begun to fear. He refuses protocol, Eric's Jundal growled, rising to his feet. His ornate robes whispered across the floor, the sound dry and brittle like burnt leaves. Earth has no standing army to enforce demands. They offer a lamb and expect mercy. Scattered chuckles answered him, a rustling wave of superiority. Council scribes positioned along the perimeter scribbled diligently onto tactile memory sheets, recording Earth's final humiliation for the archives. Above them, unnoticed, the heads-up displays embedded in the corner nodes blinked twice, almost in unison, a mechanical wink, small and ominous. A whisper through the data weave that no council security analyst caught. Durant placed his hands behind his back, a soldier's stance without a soldier's threat. His tailored diplomatic garb, black, unadorned, severe, contrasted the gilded attire of every other species present. A simple silver band gleamed at his wrist, innocuous to the eye, deadly in its truth. In the broadcast gallery, the alien press hummed with quiet excitement. Drask Mirik, the council's senior broadcast liaison, gestured frantically at his crew to zoom in closer on Duren's impassive expression. Across the galaxy, millions tuned in to witness Earth's capitulation. Duren stood unmoving, the marble beneath his boots faintly vibrating from the rhythmic low thrum of the summit's power lattice. He blinked once, slowly, absorbing the panorama before him, the posturing, the smug certainties, the gleaming weapons holstered at every delegate's side. The translator nodes embedded into the council members' ears crackled briefly, spitting garbled fragments into the ambient noise. Eric's waved irritably, slapping the side of his node. Typical Earth technology, he muttered. In the distance, the planetary winds stirred the summit's hanging gardens. The scent of crushed Velnora blossoms drifted faintly into the hall, sickly sweet, a sharp contrast to the metallic sharpness lingering around the council guard's armor. Earth's section at the edge of the dais remained notably bare, an empty chair placed neatly behind a vacant podium. The symbolism was intentional. The council had ordered a seat for Earth, a reminder of its expected subservience, and Earth, by all appearances, had accepted. Marvek Dor, far above the summit, aboard a silent observation platform cloaked behind the planet's second moon, adjusted the data feeds. He watched Duren's heart rate remain steady, even as thermal spikes around the council members indicated the first ripple of unease. Kelvon Rax, the summit's logistics officer, fidgeted at the edge of the security pit, his eyes darting toward the main console. The diagnostic threads flickered intermittently, tiny glitches he dismissed as atmospheric interference. He would later remember this moment, with crushing regret. Below, Duran exhaled slowly through his nose, the breath vanishing into the dry chill of the hall. His hands remained clasped, his gaze remained unwavering. No words, no gestures, just watching. In that instant, it was not Duran who stood alone before an empire's judgment. It was the council who found itself, unknowingly, before a guillotine dressed as a negotiation table. One by one, the councilors' expressions shifted, tiny betrayals of the body. A twitch at the corner of an eye, a clenched jaw, an absent-minded reach for a ceremonial weapon. Instinct whispered what the mind refused to hear. Something was wrong. Beyond the summit chamber's massive sealed doors, a low sequence initiated deep within the planetary infrastructure. A program older than the bricks in the council's foundation stones stretched its tendrils outward, patient, inevitable. Protocol Harrowmark. Voltron Sur's security HUD blipped crimson for a fraction of a second. He tapped the display, cursed softly, and reset it. He saw no need to alarm the others over a technical fluke. Duran Volsk offered no argument. He gave no sign of recognition. He simply was, an envoy not meant to speak, not meant to beg, not meant to yield. The chamber lights dimmed momentarily as the planetary rotation shifted the sun's angle across the vaulting glass canopy, painting Duran in a slash of fierce gold, a statue carved from intent. If the council delegates had thought to look beyond their pride, they might have seen it then. The subtle flex in Duran's shoulders, the stillness too absolute, the waiting. But arrogance, once fed, leaves little room for caution. Eric's Jundal pounded a fist against his podium, his voice booming through the reverberation channels, distorted and raw. Earth stands before us today, stripped of power, stripped of honor. Let history record their submission. Duran blinked once again. Somewhere above, unnoticed, the summit's primary security nodes silently shivered, and then shifted. And so the stage was set, not for Earth's surrender, but for the council's funeral. Fix the transmission before someone thinks we're losing control. Voltron Sur snapped, shoving the heads-up display back into alignment with a sharp flick of his clawed hand. The order snapped through the summit's tech crews, who scrambled around the chamber's perimeter, their motions jerky and uneven. On the elevated dais, Eric's Jundal smirked, his gaze still locked on Duran Vosk, as if the human silence was somehow the greater insult. Duran remained still, as if the air around him had thickened into a wall none dared cross. Somewhere overhead, one of the great council banners drooped lower, its golden threads unraveling under an unseen pressure. Eric's smile faltered, just briefly, as he noticed the movement. Weak constructs, like their owners, he muttered under his breath. In the broadcasting pit, Drask Myrek motioned sharply for a tighter frame on Duran. The laser plasma cameras adjusted, catching the envoy's slow, deliberate blink. To the audience, it was nothing. To those who watched more carefully, it was the first whisper of a storm crawling over the horizon. Behind the delegates, the language translators embedded into the chamber walls flickered, sending out a brief hiss of static. Counselors leaned back, frowning, as their whispered translations began misfiring, sentences twisted, meanings inverted. The Brultok sanctions were a success, boomed an artificial voice, distorted, from Tharnik Vol's earpiece, even though no one had said the words. He ripped the device free, tossing it to the polished floor with a snarl. Delegates whispered behind cupped hands, glancing warily between each other, while attendants rushed forward to offer replacement nodes. Their soft footfalls scraped against the marble, nervous and insistent. Duran shifted his weight slightly, hands still folded neatly behind his back. The movement was so subtle, it barely disturbed the flow of the room, but Voltron Sur saw it, and for a moment, his fingers hovered over the security override pinned to his belt. The air tasted wrong now, a thin, sharp tang that caught at the edges of the breath, leaving a dry film across the tongue. Not decay, not weaponry. Something else, something engineered. At the foot of the dais, two council guards stiffened. One of them, a heavy-set Drevik with a ceremonial halberd, reached for his sidearm, and found the holster hanging open, the clasp sheared cleanly through. He froze, glancing sideways at his partner, who discovered the same. Their weapons were loose, exposed, vulnerable. Eric's Jundal, oblivious, gestured to the hall around them with a flourish. Let it be known that Earth's envoy chose silence, a fitting answer to weakness. His voice rang out grandly, but the councilors' applause was half-hearted, the clapping stilted and hollow against the broad chamber walls. One of the side doors shuddered on its hinges, a gust from the outer corridors driving a shiver through the banners once more. Threads snapped mid-air, golden strands drifting down like ashes onto the floor below. Kelvon Rax, monitoring the secondary security feeds, glanced up, frowning. His fingers danced over his control slate, searching for anomalies. The heads-up diagnostic system blinked an error he didn't recognize. 2 characters inverted, meaningless to him, but not to those who'd woven the code. Across the broadcast feed, the screen capturing the summit began to fragment. Edges darkened. Faces blurred. Darren remained crystal clear, a single uncorrupted point at the center of a gathering storm. Tharnik Vol shifted uncomfortably again, his hand brushing the curved blade at his belt. The weapon should have reassured him, but its sudden, unnatural warmth against his palm left him colder than before. In the upper gallery, a minor clerk fainted, slumping sideways with a soft moan. An attendant caught him, muttering excuses about the thin air, about the stress of the summit. Explanations hung thinly in the air, unconvincing even to the ones offering them. Drask Merrick cursed under his breath as the live feed dropped into static for a heartbeat before returning. He gestured angrily at his crew, but their hands hovered uncertainly above their consoles. Lights flickered across their boards, casting long, fractured shadows across their faces. Still, Darren said nothing. His gaze moved slowly from face to face, the faintest tilt of his head betraying nothing but a simple, inevitable patience. Eric slammed his hand onto the podium again. This ends today. Either Earth yields its claims, or we strip them by force. A rumble of half-hearted approval followed him, but even those willing to cheer found themselves hesitating, caught by the way the heads-up displays around the hall flickered once, twice, then steadied, each pulse timed to Darren's blinking. Voltron Sir caught the pattern, but shook it off. A coincidence, an artifact of the summit's overworked systems, nothing more. Darren closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, the motion so measured it seemed ceremonial. When he opened them again, the guard stationed nearest him had unconsciously taken a step back. A distant crack echoed through the summit halls, plaster or stone, impossible to tell. The delegates flinched as one, eyes darting to the vaulted ceiling where invisible faults spiderwebbed beneath the murals. In the control room buried beneath the chamber, an unseen technician frowned at a diagnostics readout. The oxygen regulators showed a minor, unexplained surge. Cooling arrays reported intermittent failures. Emergency protocols quietly engaged and disengaged, whispering warnings into the void. Marvek Dor, floating unseen above the planet, watched the summit through a filtered feed. He noted the way Darren's biosigns never wavered, the slight uptick in localized electromagnetic flux surrounding the chamber, the way the counselor's life readings shifted, accelerated heart rates, constricted blood vessels, flickering cortical activity. They were animals scenting the first hints of fire on the wind, and still no one moved against him. Voltron Sir, sensing the tide turning, leaned towards Eric's. Perhaps we should delay. Assess. Delay is defeat. Eric snarled. His knuckles whitened against the grip of the podium. We break them now. The empty chair beside Darren stood untouched, a sentinel to the decision Earth had already made. The light filtering through the ceiling, fractured once more, thin lines cutting across the chamber floor, highlighting the cracks the council refused to see. The fading banners sighed downward, like old bones surrendering to the inevitable pull of gravity. Darren Vosk tilted his head once more, a gesture so small it barely rippled the air, and the summit, teetering on the edge of its carefully built illusions, swayed. You insult this summit by breathing our air, Eric's Jundal snarled, stepping from his podium. His boots slammed against the marble with a sharp report, the sound knifing through the heavy quiet that had wrapped itself around the chamber. Darren Vosk didn't move. His gaze rested lightly on Eric's, neither challenging nor conceding, simply present, like a mountain mist too stubborn to dissipate. Arx's stride ate the distance between them in seconds. Each step left small scuffs on the polished floor, the aggression bleeding from his shoulders, heavy and deliberate. The light from the ceiling fractured across the floor as he approached, splintering at odd angles, shadowing his figure in broken spears of gold and ash. The council guards tensed along the walls, hands hovering near weapons they weren't sure they'd need. Behind them, the laser plasma displays capturing the summit jittered with momentary static, frames skipping half a beat behind real time. Arx halted at arm's length, his breath sharp and fast enough that even from the gallery, the tight rise and fall of his chest was visible. He lifted a hand, fingers curling into a heavy shove. The impact drove into Darren's chest like a hammer blow. Darren's body folded under the force, boots slipping backward against the glassy tile. For a frozen second, the entire summit watched as Earth's envoy staggered, arms pinned to his sides by sheer will rather than reflex. Then he fell. The sound of Darren's body hitting the floor was unremarkable, a dull slap swallowed quickly by the cavernous room. No gasp followed, no outcry. Just the soft rustle of Eric's robes as he took a step back, expression triumphant. Darren lay still, one leg twisted awkwardly beneath him, hands pressed against the cool tile. His hair, dark against the floor's white sheen, spread like ink in a shallow pool. The scent of scorched polymer from the malfunctioning security nodes drifted faintly through the air, a thin, oily sting at the back of the throat. Tharnik Vol shifted uneasily, catching the glint of something small and deliberate in Darren's posture, his shoulders not slack with defeat, but braced, ready. A ripple of uneasy murmurs slithered through the rows of council delegates. Some clapped, their applause brittle and unsure. Others frowned, their gazes darting from Darren's prone form to the flickering banners overhead. Voltron Sar muttered into his wristcom, a sharp string of orders aimed at the security teams lingering at the doors. Darren moved. Not a scramble, not a stagger. He unfolded himself from the ground with slow, deliberate grace, as if testing the floor's willingness to hold him. His suit, unmarked, despite the fall, caught the fractured light, throwing a muted shimmer across his back as he rose. His chin lifted, pale eyes finding Eric's gaze without hesitation. For the first time since entering the hall, Darren blinked twice, a twitch so minimal it could have been a trick of the light. Yet deep in the heart of Karen Terra, buried beneath the stone bones of the city, Protocol Harrowmark recognized the signal. Invisible to the eyes above, command threads sprang to life, unraveling in synchronized bursts across power relays, data cores, and flight command hubs. Codes dormant for 2 years slithered from their hiding places, whispering instructions into the veins of the council's infrastructure. In the summit hall, no alarms sounded, no lights flared red. Instead, the change was slow, almost lazy. The low throb of the building's climate regulators dipped and faltered. Overhead, one of the massive banners finally surrendered, snapping free of its moorings to drift in long, lazy spirals toward the floor. It collapsed like a slain beast, its embroidery catching on the jagged corners of the dais. Arx Jundal, blind to the sudden shift, sneered down at Darren. "Now," he said, his voice swelling with the self-satisfied roar of a predator, "kneel." Darren tilted his head, as if weighing the suggestion. His lips parted, not in protest, but in what might have been mistaken for amusement if anyone had been looking closely enough. But no sound emerged, not from him, not from the audience. Even the guards held their breath. Far above, on the outer platforms where the council's personal escape vessels floated at anchor, faint clicks began ticking along docking clamps. Internal containment fields fluctuated, microseals unraveling atom by atom. The council's fleets, always proud, always prepared, shifted subtly in the void, an unconscious twitch of prey sensing the unseen coil of a predator's gaze. Marvek Dor, aboard the cloaked platform circling the summit, watched the change ripple through the satellite feeds with clinical detachment. He didn't bother issuing commands. There was no need. The lattice worked alone now. Darren straightened fully, one hand lifting to brush a fragment of dust from his sleeve. He moved like a man adjusting a cufflink before a formal dinner, not a representative standing alone among enemies. Arx, thrown by the lack of response, stepped forward again, hand lifting for another blow. Voltron Sir, reading the tension finally snapping in the guard's stances, grabbed his arm. "Enough," Voltron hissed. "Something's wrong." Arx ripped free with a snarl. Cowards see ghosts. Beyond the chamber walls, one of the council's flight platforms disappeared. Not shattered, not burned, simply erased. Sensors monitoring the ships flickered, reset, found nothing. Heads-up displays inside the summit shifted to black, save for one line of pale text, scrolling slowly across every active pane. Observation, active. Tharnik Vol, squinting at his personal terminal, felt his heart lurch against his ribs. What in the stars? He whispered. Durin turned slowly, deliberately, to face the main council gathering once again. His hands remained folded neatly at the small of his back. His breathing remained even. His expression remained empty. Another ship vanished. A dull vibration shuddered through the floor, too low for sound, but enough to set the decorative water basins rippling along the periphery. Arik stared at Durin, fury draining from his face, confusion leaching in its place. Durin offered him no explanation, no threat, just a single, unblinking stare. The first tendrils of smoke curled lazily from the docking concourses beyond the summit, invisible to those still trapped inside by their own ceremony. And far beneath them, Earth's patience, honed sharp over years of silence, began to sever the last anchors holding the council's arrogance together. "They're gone," Voltron Sur said under his breath, voice flat as stone against a tomb wall. Above the mediation hall, in orbit's brittle cold, the council's fleet should have been a scattering of silver darts against the morning stars. Instead, one after another, their sleek forms winked out of existence. No explosion, no scream of alarms, just silent erasure, like chalk wiped from a blackboard. Kelvan Rax stumbled back from his heads-up display, eyes wide as the feed showed an empty sky, where 6 warships had hovered minutes ago. His fingers clawed at the control keys, desperate for a response, but the interface only flickered back a single line of dead text. Command authority revoked. In the summit chamber, the delegates shifted, a low murmur curling between them, like fog crawling up a ravine. Panic hadn't fully taken hold yet, but the fractures were showing. Durin Vosk stood motionless, the only anchor in a room tilting toward freefall. His face betrayed nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no threat. Just the unshakable stillness of a chessmaster 2 moves from checkmate. Outside the summit walls, the council's primary evacuation vessels shimmered and folded inward without a sound. Displaced particle compression, the term was clinical, but the effect was surgical. The ship's molecular structures inverted, collapsing into themselves, until there was nothing left but a smear of displaced air and a faint shiver across local gravity sensors. No warning, no debris, just emptiness. Drask Merrick, still clutching the summit broadcast console, watched the external feeds fracture into static. His lips parted, but no words found shape. His recording crew froze, the glow of their equipment painting their faces an ugly, panicked gray. Marvek Dor observed from the cloaked observation platform far above, noting each vessel's signature fade with detached precision. His gloved hands tapped quietly against the armrest, recording the council's rapid slide from arrogance into confusion. Tharnik Vol rose halfway from his seat, voice tight. "Reconnect with the fleet, now." A tech officer skidded to his console, fingers flying over the controls. Sweat beaded across his brow as he wrestled the keys, but the laser plasma display before him remained obstinately black, the connection status flashing a brutal crimson. "They're not responding," the tech whispered, horror leaking through each word. Voltron Sur leaned close to Arix Jundal, his voice a knife's whisper. "We must evacuate immediately. This summit is compromised." Arix, still staring at Durin as if trying to will the human into flinching, shook his head once. Panic feeds defeat. Voltron's teeth bared in a tight grimace. He keyed his private comm, sending a silent command to summon backup from the secondary garrisons stationed across the city. No reply. The comm screen sputtered, flickered, died. Outside, another ripple rolled across the upper atmosphere as a stealth interceptor, one of the Council's newest models, disintegrated into a mist of scattered ions. From the ground it looked like a shooting star going the wrong way, burning against a sky that seemed suddenly too still. A low, almost imperceptible vibration hummed through the floor beneath the delegates' feet. Cups and data slates rattled softly. The grand banners hanging from the ceiling sagged further, their intricate weaves unraveling like spiderwebs under fire. The council guards shifted their weight, glancing toward the sealed exits, hands twitching toward their useless holsters. The sense of security that had anchored this gathering bled away, leaving only the brittle skeleton of formality. Durin Vosk remained silent. He turned slightly, just enough for the central laser plasma displays to catch the full view of his profile against the gilded council emblems behind him. The room grew colder, not in temperature, but in spirit, as if some ancient gate had opened somewhere out of sight, and through it flowed not an army, but inevitability. Kelvon Rax, heart-pounding, tried one last desperate override. His fingers blurred across the input keys, shouting into the dead air between himself and the system that no longer recognized his authority. Above him, the emergency indicators lining the summit walls flickered once, twice, and went dark. Yorick Venn, seated in the broadcast gallery, scribbled frantic notes. His mind already shaped the story he would tell later, not of a summit, not of negotiation, but of the day the sky forgot the council's name. Eric's Jundal stepped toward Darren again, though slower now, uncertainty creeping into his movements like frost-cracking stone. "What is this?" he demanded, the bravado in his voice chipping away with every syllable. Darren's gaze met his. Still no answer, still no need for one, because above them, the final layer of the council's orbital defenses shivered and vanished. From the summit's grand windows, the delegates should have seen their fleet, a wall of protection against threats both imagined and real. Instead, they now faced a sky scraped raw and barren, the familiar lights of their ships erased as if they had never existed. In that moment, for the first time in living memory, the council had no guardians, no reinforcements, no exit. The chamber creaked beneath the weight of realization. Drask Marek stumbled from his console, retching into the shadows behind the broadcast pit, the acid bite of fear coating his throat. None of the other reporters moved to help him. Their hands were frozen white around their equipment, their eyes locked on the unfolding collapse. Tharnik Vol grabbed the edge of his podium, knuckles bone pale. This is an act of war." The accusation rang hollow in the shattered room. Voltron Sir, muscles taut with trapped action, growled low in his throat. "You cannot declare war against someone who has already won." No one moved, no orders flew, no weapons fired, just Darren Vosk, still and silent, watching them drown in a sea of their own undone pride. One of the council banners tore free at last, sailing across the chamber like a wounded bird, landing in a tangled heap atop the summit's central dais. The sound it made, cloth dragging against stone, was louder than any battle cry. The councilors looked to the exits, to their security staff, to each other. "Seize him!" Voltron Sir's command shattered the dead air like a whip crack. Guards surged forward, boots striking the marble tiles with desperate urgency. The clatter rang sharp through the mediation hall, snapping the delegates from their frozen horror. Eric's Jundal recoiled, uncertainty flashing across his face for the first time. Darren Vosk did not flinch. The first guard reached him, hand outstretched, then stumbled, blinking in confusion. His exo-gauntlet, moments ago humming with kinetic charge, sparked once before going cold, lifeless as a discarded shell. The second tried drawing his shock staff, only for it to jerk violently from his grasp and clatter to the floor, inert. Heads-up displays around the summit lit with frantic status updates. System override, null authority engaged. Manual takedown. Voltron barked into his comm. His voice broke into a raw edge. No response came, only a soft whispering feedback loop, like breathing against glass. The guards tried anyway. Two lunged bodies twisting mid-air to pin Darren against the marble dais. He moved, barely. A pivot, a sidestep so quiet it looked like an afterthought. One assailant slammed into the polished floor, breath blasting from his lungs. The other skidded to a halt, weaponless hands grasping uselessly at the air. At the edge of the council rose, Kelvon Rax stared at his wristband, watching as the security indicators winked out one after another, extinguished like dying embers. Tharnik Vol rose, knocking over his chair with a screech. "This is an attack. Sir, restore order." Voltron Sir's reply was lost under a sudden snap from beneath the dais. Floor panels cracked outward along hidden seams, the sound sharp enough to make the delegates wince. From the widening splits rose slender columns, each crowned with curved hilts glinting under the fractured light. Darren's gaze never moved. The induction daggers emerged around him like thorns sprouting from stone. The weapons hovered for a moment before descending gently into shallow slots, humming with a faint resonance. They did not buzz or glow, or whir like the council's own tech. They simply existed, vibrating at a frequency felt more than heard, a sickening tension that scraped nails across the mind. Voltron Sur hesitated, nostrils flaring. Arix, desperate to reclaim the room, pointed a trembling finger at Darren. "He's unarmed. He's bluffing." Darren blinked once, slow, measured. Without warning, the induction daggers activated. A shimmer passed through the room, thin and sharp as a wire pulled taut. Those closest to the dais staggered backward, clutching their throats, hands scrabbling at mouths that no longer obeyed. No scream, no cry, just a collective choking silence. Council delegates fell against their thrones, some sliding to the floor, eyes wide in horror. Their vocal cords hadn't been severed. The neural patterns that allowed speech had been cut clean away. Tharnik gasped silently, one hand clawing at the collar of his robe. Kelvon Rax tried to call for medical aid, but no words formed, only a thin whistle of useless breath escaped. Darren stepped forward. The movement drew every terrified gaze. One step, measured and soundless, and he became the center of the collapsing world. Marvik Dor, observing from above, recorded the council's vital signs dropping into chaos. Spiking heart rates, vascular constriction, cortical anomalies. The psychological net was tightening. Voltron Sur fumbled for a manual override on his chest plate. The device shorted out in a shower of sparks, the faint scent of scorched polymers filling his nostrils. He ripped it free, cursing without voice. Eric's Jundal stumbled backward, lips moving furiously in silent oaths. He reached for his ceremonial sidearm. The weapon, locked down by Harrow-marked subroutines, refused to respond, a dead weight in his trembling hands. At the summit's periphery, the guards had ceased their advance. Disarmed, confused, terrified, they clutched their throats or backed toward the walls, seeking exits that no longer existed. The laser plasma displays across the hall flickered. Transcripts, real-time communication logs, internal alerts, everything scrambled into a chaotic spiral of broken code. The council's own systems turned traitor before their stunned eyes. Heads-up banners rippled across the displays. Fail-safe loop 14A active. Council status, contained. Eric's turned on Voltron, face flushing violet with rage. "Fix this," he mouthed, the words grotesque in their silent fury. Voltron stared back, helpless. At the center of the storm, Darren Vosk stood alone, unmoving. His very presence seemed to rewrite the rules the council had once enforced. Not with violence, not with proclamations, with inevitability. A second wave of induction frequencies swept the chamber. Those still standing collapsed into their thrones, or to the polished floor, hands pressed uselessly against the sides of their heads. The silence was no longer the absence of sound. It was a force. It crushed thought, smothered pride, buried centuries of political power under a single terrible truth. Control was an illusion they had built on shifting sand. Drask Mirik, his body half hidden behind a toppled broadcast console, managed to crawl forward. He gripped the recording unit with shaking hands, broadcasting nothing but static to the millions still tuned in. Yorick Venn, watching from the upper gallery, scribbled a single line into his recording slate. The day the council learned to fear silence. Darren lowered his hands to his sides, the only acknowledgement of the devastation around him. Above the chamber, the last of the council banners, shredded and limp, hung from its mooring, a broken emblem for a broken order. Voltron Sur sagged against the wall, defeated without a battle, conquered without a weapon. He met Darren's gaze one last time, and in that endless, unreadable stare, found the answer Earth had sent, shut him down. Eric's Jundal's silent scream clawed against the invisible barrier that had stolen his voice. The words existed only in his mind. His mouth moved, forming commands, threats, pleas, but no sound came. Nothing but the scraping of boot heels against marble, the rustle of robes, the brittle collapse of an empire unraveling at the seams. Across the summit chamber, the air shifted, not with a roar, not with force, but with a thickening weight, as if the walls themselves had leaned closer to listen to the council's final humiliation. Darren Vosk stood unmoved, a still point in the center of the chaos. Around him, the induction daggers embedded in the floor panels pulsed with a cold, rhythmic thrum. Each beat sent a ripple through the chamber, each ripple slicing another thread from the delegate's ability to resist. Tharnik Vol clawed at his throat, desperate for breath he could feel but no longer control. His eyes darted to the exits, sealed, forgotten. Voltron Sir staggered upright, trying to rally the security forces. His hand signals were frantic, disjointed, a language learned too late to be useful. The guards, weaponless and dazed, mirrored his gestures in confusion. Beyond the chamber's glasswork arches, the sky darkened. The Council's orbital defense grid, once their shield against rebellion, lay in ruins, not shattered by missiles, not carved apart by plasma fire, just absent, stripped clean by the systems they trusted most. On the summit floor, a councilor fell heavily to his knees, gasping through slack lips. Another stumbled against the dais, hands slapping uselessly at the polished surface. Their expressions blurred between confusion and dawning horror, the realization sinking deep into marrow. They were prisoners of their own silence. The laser plasma displays arrayed around the hall shimmered once, struggling to maintain a feed. The faces of the audience flickered between twisted panic and utter despair. For a heartbeat, the entire galaxy watched leaders crumble in real time. Then the broadcast stuttered. Static bled across the display edges, devouring color, draining sound, leaving only a ragged visual of frozen fear. Drask Merrick slammed his fists into the manual override controls, but the transmission slipped through his fingers, a dream fading on waking. The feed died. Only the summit remained, and the heavy, ringing quiet that replaced the chorus of authority. Above the hall, Marvek Dor monitored from his silent platform. His fingers danced across the console with detached precision, logging every system failure, every blackout, every heartbeat's worth of terror blooming inside the chamber below. Earth's dominance was no longer a threat. It was a fact. In the council pit, Erix lurched forward, hands outstretched toward Darren, rage etched into every trembling line of his body. He collided with an invisible wall, a shimmer of induction waves holding him at bay. He fell backward, sprawling in a graceless heap at the foot of the dais, his robes tangled around him, a king dethroned not by battle, but by irrelevance. Darren's gaze passed over him without slowing. Across the room, Kelvon Rax convulsed once, clutching at the security relay strapped to his belt. The device sparked briefly, then sagged into lifelessness. A thread of smoke twisted upward, the bitter scent catching in the dry air. Delegates clung to their seats, eyes pleading, hands trembling. Some tried to mouth protests, declarations of innocence, bargains for survival, their faces contorted with the effort, but the room granted no mercy, no noise, no bargaining, only the quiet drift of dust motes in the fractured shafts of light. Yorick Venn, from his vantage high above, pressed a shaking hand to the observation rail. His writing slate slipped from numb fingers, clattering unheard to the floor. He watched Darren cross the chamber with unhurried steps, each footfall a silent hammer beating against the cracked foundations of power. Voltron Sir surged to intercept him, face purpled with exertion. He swung a baton, clumsy, desperate. Darren sidestepped without looking. Voltron crashed into the dais edge, grunting in muted agony. Tharnik Vol tried to stand, knees buckling as another pulse from the induction grid washed over him. His vision blurred at the edges. The chamber spun slowly, mocking his pride. No one spoke, no one commanded, no one stopped Darren Volsk. At the center of the floor, the council's sigil, an emblem representing unity, diplomacy, strength, lay fractured by hairline cracks snaking outward like veins. Darren paused above it. He lowered his gaze, a brief acknowledgement of what had been broken. A heady scent of scorched plastic lingered where control panels had shorted out. The taste of failure was dry in every mouth, heavy as old paper left to decay in forgotten vaults. Above, the final laser plasma display winked out. The hall plunged into muted twilight, lit only by the failing ambient strips along the archways. Stillness gripped the chamber, deep enough that even the shuffle of cloth, the scrape of bodies shifting weakly, seemed blasphemous. Darren turned slowly, surveying the field of muted rulers, broken warriors, silenced tyrants. He said nothing. He needed to say nothing. His presence was verdict enough. Beyond the shattered windows, the first stars prickled against the darkening sky, uncaring witnesses to the council's final descent. In that moment, the delegates understood. Language had abandoned them, power had betrayed them, pride had buried them, and Earth had done it without firing a single shot inside the hall. Darren's pale eyes swept over them one last time, the ghost of a breath passing his lips. Then he stepped back from the dais, letting the broken remains of the council absorb their defeat in complete, annihilating silence. Begin the sequence. Marvek Dor's voice cracked the stillness of the command deck, low and final, above the crumbling summit, unseen against the churning upper atmosphere. The obsidian array stirred. Sleek panels peeled open like black flowers, awakening after a long winter. No alarms rang. No defensive arrays flared to life. Nothing up there knew to resist what had already wrapped itself around their throats. Marvek's gloved hands moved without hesitation across the control board, his touch feather light. The heads-up displays bloomed before him. Grids mapping the Council's orbital infrastructure, defense satellites, communication towers, shield generators, beacon platforms. Each blinked steady green, and then, at his signal, one by one, the lights began to wink out. No thunderclap marked their death. No bright flare lit the sky. Satellites died like snuffed candles, silent, unseen. On the planet below, the summit delegates shivered, unaware of how naked they had just become. Marvek watched the orbital feed flatten. Without the Council's high-tier satellites, the planet's protective net buckled, leaving great swathes of atmosphere exposed. Weather controls flickered, spiraling delicate cloud bands into chaos. Subsurface comms relays, dependent on synchronous orbital feedback, collapsed into static. From orbit, the planet's lights looked like a dying ember patch, flickering, sputtering against the dark tide. Phase 2, Marvek said into the silent cabin. The second wave rippled outward. The obsidian array shifted formation with predatory grace. Sleek hulls, painted in absorbent materials that devoured radar and visible light alike, repositioned along invisible geodesic lines drawn years earlier during Earth's initial infiltration. Target nodes blinked once on Marvek's screen, soft amber, before vanishing into the black. Power grids across Terra dipped, surged, and then flattened into cold darkness. In the summit chamber, the faint emergency strips along the walls coughed, flickered, and surrendered. Only the half-light of dusk bleeding through shattered windows remained. Arix Jundal, staggering to his knees, finally looked up and understood. Above them, the sky that had once glinted with the proud points of Council fleets now gaped hollow and starved. No sentinels, no guardians, no help. Darren Vosk stood framed against that fading light, as unmoving as ever, an unspoken sentence carved in flesh and silence. Inside the command module of the array, Marvek shifted slightly in his chair, the only concession to the enormity of what was happening. His crew mirrored him, focused, clinical, their faces caught between awe and duty. "We are dark across all sectors," came a whisper from the surveillance operator. His voice cracked with reverence more than fear. Marvek nodded once, maintained silence. Let them sit in it. Beneath him, Terra's skies grew heavier, the atmosphere thick with the unmoored energy of collapsing systems. Shields that once layered the planet like nested shells cracked apart invisibly, bleeding soft magnetic currents into the upper winds. The data feed showed it clearly, the Council's planetary defense harmonics, broken. Marvek leaned back, surveying the dead planet below with the slow satisfaction of an artist studying the final stroke on a canvas. On the surface, Kelvon Rax stumbled through the summit's wreckage, clawing at a dead console. His head snapped toward the windows, searching, praying for the glint of friendly reinforcements. There was nothing. The realization swept over the remaining counselors like a drowning wave, their voices stolen, their weapons disabled, their ships erased. Now even the stars had turned away. The last functional heads-up display sputtered violently near the summit's northern alcove, sending a final flicker of error messages into the dark, before surrendering with a muted pop. Duran watched without a word. Voltron Sur dragged himself upright, sweat streaking the dust across his temples. His eyes burned as he scanned the room, landing finally on Duran, the architect of their downfall, standing without armor, without a visible weapon. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of endings. Above the ruined council, the obsidian array drifted through orbital graveyards it had made, engines quiet, systems dormant, now that their work was finished. They didn't need to stay visible. They didn't need to stay at all. Marvek keyed a final command into the console. Phase concluded. Array dispersal. Marvek sat back and watched the planet turn, stripped and blind, spinning unaware into the new order. Earth had written in silence and waiting. Inside the summit hall, Darren Vosk stepped from the shattered dais, His footfalls, soft against the wreckage-strewn marble, sounded louder than any gunfire would have. Yorick Venn, scribbling furiously into his damaged slate, recorded one last line: "No empire falls with a scream. The greatest fall with a whisper, unnoticed until it's too late to rise again." At the summit's collapsed entrance, the once proud banners of the council, torn and sagging, stirred faintly in the restless wind blowing through shattered panels. There would be no rescue missions, no last-minute armadas, no grand speeches, just silence, and the cold final truth that Earth had taken everything without demanding anything. "Observation complete," whispered the summit's cracked announcement grid, the voice not belonging to any being present. The words, dry and weightless, trickled into the silence like water seeping into fractured stone. Yorick Venn watched from the upper gallery, breath caught in his throat, hand frozen above his abandoned recording slate. The counselors below, crumpled in their thrones or kneeling among shattered marble, lifted their heads sluggishly, drawn by the shift. At the center of the devastation, Darren Vosk moved. He did not rush. His pace was deliberate, unhurried, as though leaving a room after finishing a dull meeting. Dust stirred around his boots, tracing invisible patterns in the fractured light. None dared move to block him. He descended from the dais, one step at a time, the broken remains of banners in shattered consoles, framing his path like ruins of an empire that no longer ruled. The emergency strips flickered weakly, casting him in stuttering bands of blue and gold, a silent procession's only witness. Voltron Sur sagged against a pillar, head bowed, a defeated titan, stripped of armor and command alike. Eric's Jundel, one hand pressed to the floor, glared up through bloodshot eyes, hatred smoldering where power once sat easy. Yet even he found no strength to rise, to strike, to speak. Tharnik Vol remained slumped beside the toppled crest of the council itself, fingertips brushing the shattered sigil, as if hoping to gather what dignity remained. Darren passed them all without pause, the subtle scrape of his boots across cracked marble, louder than any proclamation. Near the summit's collapsed entrance, the heavy doors once guarded by ornate security locks now stood ajar, their complex seals darkened and cracked open from within. Yorick's fingers trembled as he resumed writing, struggling to capture the moment in words that felt too thin to contain it. He did not conquer, he did not demand, he simply left, and the galaxy followed. As Darren approached the doorway, the summit's main control pillar, toppled and flickering weakly, flared to sudden life. Heads turned sluggishly toward it, senses dulled by fear, hope faint as smoke. The voice returned. Not human, not alien, neutral, measured, ancient, and inevitable. The laser plasma display above the dais blinked once, stuttered, and steadied. Text scrolled across in crisp, unforgiving lines. Negotiation terminated. No dramatics, no flourish. The words hit harder than any bombardment. The silence afterward deepened, thick enough to press against the skin. Darren crossed the threshold without looking back. Wind, heavy with the scent of crushed stone and ionized air from distant energy fractures, ghosted through the broken entrance and stirred the tatters of the council banners. Outside, the summit grounds lay abandoned. Shattered columns leaned drunkenly against each other. The sky, once shielded by the lattice of orbital defense nets, stretched open and exposed, stars cold and sharp against the thinning atmosphere. Above the wreckage, unseen but ever-present, Earth's obsidian array hovered silently in retreat, their work done, their existence still unacknowledged by any council archive. Inside the chamber, Tharnik Vol forced his broken voice into a whisper that barely stirred the air. How did we not see this? No answer came. Yorick Venn etched another line into the brittle pages of history. It was not that they spoke louder, it was that they no longer needed to speak at all. The council delegates, leaders of 100 worlds, remained where they had fallen. Some wept silently, others stared blankly at the shattered walls. Their pride, unraveled. Their dominion, hollowed. No declarations of vengeance rang out, no calls to rally. What could be rallied, when the heavens themselves had turned their backs? One by one, the few remaining guards lowered their weapons, the tips of their rifles kissing the marble floor with a soft final click. Far above, the shattered orbits remained empty. No fleets would descend, no reinforcements waited beyond the silent horizon. Darren Vosk's silhouette faded into the shadows beyond the summit's wreckage, absorbed by the broken cityscape without ceremony or triumph. No flag planted, no anthem sung, only the long, slow collapse of an empire that mistook patience for weakness. Yorick bowed his head over his slate. Let the record show, it was not Earth's might that ended the council, it was Earth's silence. A gust of warm air pushed through the broken summit doors, lifting the scattered remnants of treaties and accords into the air. Pages twisted lazily upward, catching the last rays of the dying sun before disappearing into the broken rafters. The Council of Worlds, once the architects of galactic law, were left cradling the ashes of their own arrogance. Above them, the last operational heads-up display dimmed into blackness. The verdict had been delivered, and Earth had not needed a single word more. Record the minutes, Yorick Venn muttered into the dim recorder unit before him, the old device struggling to keep pace. His voice, though dry from the stale summit air, cut cleanly into the stillness of the new council chamber. The hall had been rebuilt atop the bones of the old, the same marble tiles, the same towering arches. The banners now hung lower, their embroidery muted, the colors faded intentionally, to remember. At the chamber's center, where once the council crest had dominated the floor, a new monument stood, a single black obelisk, faceless, featureless. Embedded near its peak, a solitary sensor node glinted faintly beneath the light. Earth's silent eye. No plaque marked it, no dedication was needed. It was enough to know they were watching. Months had passed since the fall. Not a war, not a battle, a correction. The council still ruled, or so it told itself. Decisions were made, decrees issued, trade flowed, armadas still patrolled the frontier, but beneath every word, beneath every charter, lay a truth heavier than any decree. Earth had rewritten the galaxy without carving a single wound on its surface, and no one dared forget. Yorick adjusted the recorder, his fingers brushing the device's worn edges. The day silence spoke, he began, voice steady now, is studied not merely as an event, but as a turning point in galactic history. A reminder that power is not always a weapon raised high. Sometimes, it is the hand that never needs to close into a fist. At the new council gatherings, human envoys never sat among the delegates. They did not shout, posture, or plead. They observed, and that was enough. Today, as the councilors shuffled into their seats, their eyes flickered, not toward the podium, nor the banners, but toward the black obelisk, a reminder in stone. Tharnik Vol, older now, his gills dulled with age and regret, passed the monument with a bowed head. His footsteps, once proud, faltered slightly as he crossed the dais. Voltron Serrer, face lined with battles he never fought, tapped out silent security codes into his personal console. None of the codes mattered. Earth's systems cradled the network like a spider cradles a web. Kelvin Rax hunched lower in his seat, endlessly adjusting the cuffs of his robe. Every sound, every shift of cloth and breath, seemed louder in the presence of that quiet watcher. Eric's Jundal had not returned. After the summit's collapse, he disappeared into exile, leaving behind only wreckage and whispers. Yorick's pen scratched across the slate as he narrated for history. The greatest power Earth wielded was not dominance by sword or fire, but the understanding that fear once earned without being demanded, roots deeper than any occupation. From the gallery, young observers leaned forward, their faces a mix of awe and unease. They had never known a council without Earth's gaze. To them the black obelisk was as natural as the morning sun. The day's proceedings began, thin voices rising to propose measures, laws, amendments. Every word weighed first against the memory of silence that once drowned this hall. As Tharnik spoke, his voice caught briefly, an old wound, not physical, but buried deep where pride had once lived. Yorick's recorder buzzed faintly, capturing every pause, every glance at the silent node. Far above the hall, cloaked within a shell of interference, Earth's obsidian platforms remained in orbit. They did not interfere, they did not need to. Presence was enough. In the outer colonies, stories of Darren Vosk became legend. No great monuments bore his name, no statues graced plazas, yet every academy taught the lesson he embodied. Strength does not announce itself. It is recognized when the shouting ends, and only one figure still stands. Darren Vosk taught a galaxy, accustomed to declarations and invasions, that the ultimate declaration is restraint. Yorick said, sealing the final line into the record. The session adjourned without ceremony. No cheers, no applause. Delegates filed out, heads bowed slightly, conversation hushed. As they passed the obelisk, None dared look too long. Outside the new council complex, the city of Carantera bustled on, ships docked, markets thrived, lives continued, but even the breeze that swept the summit steps seemed to carry the weight of memory. At the edge of the plaza, a young boy pointed up at the obelisk and tugged at his father's sleeve. "Is that where they spoke?" His father hesitated, then shook his head. "No," he said softly. "That's where they chose to listen." The boy frowned in confusion, but said no more, slipping his small hand into his father's as they walked away. Yorick watched them go, heart heavier than when he had arrived. Above him, stars blinked coldly against the darkening sky. Somewhere among them, Earth waited, not conquering, not posturing, watching. History would remember the Council's fall, not as a defeat by arms, but as the day silence became the sharpest blade, and Earth, without ever drawing blood, carved its place into the marrow of every world, for they had come to speak, and left as the only voice worth hearing.